Our lives are determined by important dates and number. This number, 3,690, represents a pivotal time in my life. This is my story of strength, my journey of never giving up, and when moments of adversity, we learn how strong we really are. I grew up in Sabana Grande, Puerto Rico. I became the first engineer in my family, and that took lots of sacrifice and support from my parents. My mom is a retired elementary school English teacher, and my dad is a retired food services sales representative. Sometimes I would go with my dad to visit his clients, and he would get their orders, and I would get one of his little order notepads and scribble a bunch of numbers on it. Those were the earlier days of my engineering career and a bit of my skill development in sales. Mom and Dad never saw any limits to what I could achieve, so I was brainwashed from a very young age into believing if I worked really hard, I could do or be anything. I believed Mom and Dad. So when I wanted to go to space camp, Mom and Dad helped me, but I sold lots of chocolates to attend as a fundraiser, and my mom fried bacalaitos in the town's Christmas festival. I learned early on that work ethic, hard work, and lots of prayer would get me what I wanted. Simple concepts, right? So when it was time to apply for college, I applied to the civil engineering department at the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez, Colegio. I was still scared that even though I had done pretty good at school, I had good grades, I wouldn't be smart enough to become an engineer. But again, I had been brainwashed by my parents, so I was determined to go for it. Now at college, I did 2 internships that changed everything. The Walt Disney World College program. I am hardly 5 feet tall, so yes, I was the mouse. I also spoke to my department supervisor, Carlos, and he connected me with a Disney engineer. I got to shadow him and visit Disney behind the scenes. And so I learned with that experience that engineers do really cool things, but also that self-initiative will get us really far. And we don't have to wait until somebody asks us to do something or get something for us. We are responsible for our success, and with some magic helpers too. So after college graduation, and actually before graduation, having Disney on my resume got me my next internship opportunity at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, my childhood dream. At NASA, I was working in the Advanced Projects Office, and during my internship, I attended my first diversity and inclusion workshop. Later that day, I learned that I was a minority, just like the ones I had spoken about in the workshop. I didn't know I was a minority. Nobody told me, coming from Puerto Rico, I did not know that I was different. And you know what? Being ignorant or naive actually helped me to never feel different, to never see any limitations of what I could accomplish, or that being a Latina was an obstacle. So I kept going. Now, a few years ago, I watched the America Ferrera TED Talk, where she describes our identities as Latinas as a superpower and not an obstacle. And I agree with her. However, 2 to 3% of Latinas are represented in the engineering workforce. So I can never be afraid of being the first one or the only one. It was okay to be the silver unicorn in the room, and earning respect for my work took maybe double or triple the effort, but I was determined to not become a quota. So after NASA and graduation, I moved to Vicksburg, Mississippi to work for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and that was an amazing technical foundation for my career in aviation. I worked in the Airfields and Pavements branch for the Department of Defense, and it was important to me to become an expert in the field so that I could earn respect in the industry. And us engineers, we are trained to solve problems. So I was determined to keep going. Now, a few years later, my husband, Eileen, also a civil engineer from Puerto Rico, we changed fields and we went to the dark side, consulting. So we also moved back to, we moved to Florida to be closer to home, and I became an airport engineer designing and construction for commercial airports. And I loved my job as an airport engineer. But I remember one time at a project, very early on as a project manager, that the contractor told me, "No offense, ma'am, but I thought you were older. We had only interacted over the phone." Another amusing comment that I remember was, "You're good with pavements, and that's weird for a girl." Being weird is not that bad, so I took it as a compliment. Now, working at airports was an adventure, and I loved my work as an airport engineer. I felt that I was working in a small city. Airports have everything. I also met some amazing women pioneers along the way that mentored and guided me, and they also helped me become more active in nonprofit organizations such as the Society of Women Engineers and Women in Aviation. Now, remember the number which I started? 3,690 days. That is my age since my reborn date on July 9th of 2012. And that date, I had a second chance at life when I had an autologous stem cell transplant. My battle with Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 4, began on September 17th of 2010. At that time, I was a thriving aviation engineer, a project manager, working for a Fortune 500 company, leading amazing multidisciplinary projects and an amazing engineering team. But most importantly, I was 5 months pregnant. After 3 chemotherapies, Ana Isabel was born healthy, tiny, and with lots of hair. Today, Ana Isabel is a smart, beautiful, and healthy 11-year-old girl going on 20. Now, the stem cell transplant was needed because when Ana was a year old, I had a reoccurrence. I remember those were very dark times in my life, but I also remember a lot of support from my family, friends, and coworkers, and never giving up. There is life after cancer, a good, prosperous life with new meaning and a challenge to make it all worth it. So here I am today. And after all that happened, as a good engineer, I always thought, I need to know percentages. What are the percentages of survival? 30 to 40% chance of reoccurrence was still too high, and is still too high today. But I am determined to live and see my daughter grow up. Losing control, that concept was very hard for me. I always had a plan in my life, one that did not include the inconvenience of cancer. So after a 2-year hiatus from everything in my life, I went back to work. I was blessed that I had a supportive employer that never pressured me to go back to work. So it was even better that when I was ready back on track, my employer offered me to move to Puerto Rico to lead the company's local office. That was in 2014. Obviously, I said yes, and I moved back to Puerto Rico. Despite the political and socioeconomic turmoil on the island, I saw that as a dream. I've always wanted to go back to Puerto Rico, and I consider going back to one's country of origin to give back is one of life's best accomplishments. So after 6 years of going back to Puerto Rico and surviving Hurricane Maria and earthquakes and COVID, my life took another turn. I had dedicated my career to improving airport infrastructure and transportation infrastructure. I also became an advocate for girls in STEM, especially Latinas in STEM. I felt I had a responsibility because I had so many great experiences and opportunities in my career that I had to give it all back. So, on November of 2020, I got a call. I was working out, and I don't work out as much anymore. Wonder why. We'll see. So they called me and asked me to submit my resume for consideration in the new Governor Pierluisi's administration. As crazy as that sounded, I sent in my resume, I went to the interviews, and on December 7th of 2020, I became the first woman in the 105-year history of the Department of Transportation. I became the Secretary of Transportation and Public Works. I might be the first, but I'm certain that I would not be the last. This was not an easy decision. I thought about it a lot. I talked with my family. I talked with my husband. But I had moved back to Puerto Rico to give back to the island, and I was determined to help in our island's recovery. It was always also part of my calling. So during the first few days, I remember someone from the press called me nice and naive. And I was thinking back on those earlier days as an engineering student alone in Huntsville, Alabama. I consider myself extremely optimistic and brave, and maybe, yes, a bit naive. But that has helped me focus on the possibilities and not the possible negative outcomes. So now being back in Puerto Rico and being the secretary, I think back on my journey and all those moments where I had the adversity in my life. And I told my mom once at the hospital when during my stem cell transplant, my mom was my caregiver. I told Mom, someday I will go back to Puerto Rico and I'm going to become the Secretary of Transportation. Never thought that would be possible. And here I am today in front of all of you as a 10-year cancer survivor and the secretary. So we got to be very careful to what we put out there into the universe. When days are really hard or very difficult as secretary, I think back on my journey and how this is serving as an example for other women in the engineering industry, my daughter, and to the fellow Latinas. So representation does matter. Maybe I thought that I had not signed up for all this. And there are days when I think, what have I gotten myself into? I did not sign up for this. But then I think I am here because I'm improving Puerto Rico's transportation safety, our services, and our reconstruction. And I'm here, and I've already made history. And I did survive cancer twice, so I can do this. I got this. Now, maybe I thought I had not signed up for all this. And yes, there are challenges. Every day there's a new challenge. But just as in life, we have to keep going. So right before I went on my first press conference as secretary, and now I think back how powerful and how important that was to just go there with a clear and open heart and trusting that I was the person to do this. I went up there, and right before I go to speak in this press conference, I came across the Bible verse, Esther 4:14, and it says, "You were born for such a time as this." We never know where the journey might take us. And if I was chosen to do this, I am the one to make the change. And perhaps this is the moment for which I've been created. Gracias.